Hello, friends, and welcome back to this week's episode of the Embodied Healing Self. So, I am here this week to share a very special guest on the show with you. Somebody who has been such an integral part of the healing in both my own life and in the life of my family. From 10 and a half years ago when we first met, it is my honor to share with you today, Dr. Toni Krehel.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you. Thank you. This is my honor. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here today. So I'm really feeling a lot of gratitude in my heart today as I bring Toni to the show today. And I just want to share with you that why this moment is so profoundly special to me is because I know that for many of you, I have shared my personal journey through health and wellness. And I've shared on the show about my own health crisis that happened. But what I haven't shared a lot about was the after the health crisis, which included really more trauma in my life as it was around taking care of a child that was very highly sensitive. We had many sleepless nights. We were invested in the traditional system of trying to seek answers for our daughter who was really struggling to thrive, who was really just, no one had answers for her. And so 10 and a half years ago, I found myself in the office of Toni Krehel. Now, Toni is a doctor in Chinese medicine. She is the Florida director for the National Vaccine Information, which she has held that position for 20 years. But really what she is a healer. She has so many gifts that she shares. She does herbal wellness, homeopathy, moxa, energy medicine, biofeedback, Tibetan singing bowls, which is where I got my bowls, sound healing, essential oils. And when you find yourself in her office, it is just an experience of just fully receiving healing on so many levels. You're a very, very gifted healer in so many ways. And you are also an extremely knowledgeable and passionate and caring heart person with such a big heart who is doing this work behind the scenes that nobody even knows about. And you've been doing this work for 20 years. It's a passion of yours. And, you know, part of my journey, why I'm so happy to share you today is because my journey around healing, you were the most integral part of it for my family.
Well, so that's quite a mouthful. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
But it's a two-way street and it's mutual.
Oh, thank you so much. So, you know, most of the listeners on the show, some of them have known me for the past 10 and a half years. So some of them may know of my journey. They may have seen me completely transform through really being in a place of like survival mode and trying to take care of my daughter to coming through to thriving and then becoming a coach myself and a teacher and a mentor for when I was health coaching, really for other mothers of highly sensitive children for a long time, and now stepping into a place of empowering women and doing more life coaching. Some of the listeners know my whole experience and some of them don't. So I'm going to share with them today why we're talking about the topic of vaccines. And just to create the container for this space, I just want to say for the listeners, this show is not about convincing you whether they are right or wrong for you. This is a platform to share information, just to educate you so that you can have more information to feel empowered in what your choices are and how you choose to take care of your health and wellness for you and your family. So that's really what we're here to do today.
Right.
So
right. How does it fit into this area that we're in? Yeah,
absolutely. And I think, you know, this is an edgy topic. It's like in the world of nutrition, talking about should I eat animal protein or not is like the most controversial topic that we talk about when it comes to nutrition. And I think when it comes to health and wellness, specifically around parenting, I think this is the hardest decision that we make as parents. And I'm sure that I'm not alone when I say that it feels that there is no win-win situation here sometimes. And I think that it's one of the reasons that it's uncomfortable to talk about, it's uncomfortable to hear. And a lot of that just comes from the fear of not knowing, the fear of not having the information to be empowered to make choices.
Right.
And so you were the perfect person to bring onto the show to just educate us about what our rights are and how vaccines work. Even I think that there are people that don't understand how they work, what boosters do, what happens if we don't do the schedule, what are there some other options, what factors should we consider in our child? Is it just a physical thing? Is there an energetic constitutional part that we should consider, which is
that's a good question.
A large part of Chinese medicine. So we're going to touch on all of that today.
Okay.
What I want to start with by showing why I'm so passionate about this is because I want to just share my personal story around vaccines. So many of the listeners know that I had a very traumatic birth experience with my first daughter. She was born almost 7 weeks early. And so she was a preemie in the hospital. So I was in the hospital for the first, I think, 10 days after she was born. And then when I went home, she was just in the hands of the care at the hospital. I would go home and sleep, and then I would come back. And I can remember the day that I walked in the hospital and the nurse said to me, "Oh, by the way, we gave her Hep B vaccine." And so they did this without asking me. And I remember thinking like, oh, silly me. Like, you know, of course you did. It's the law. Like, it's why wouldn't you? Like, why would I question it? So I didn't question it. And to be honest, I'm a rule follower by nature. I was in the military. Like, I like the structure. And after having this birth experience where literally the doctors saved my life, there was no way I was going to question traditional medicine. I was just in the space of like, yeah, that's the way it is. This is what you do. So 3-pound baby, given full vaccinations, 4 or 5 at a time, as a 4-pound baby starting at, a month old, right? So she started to get on schedule. And I remember thinking like, that's a little strange. They're going to give her the same amount that they're giving like a 10-pound newborn baby, but still wasn't in the place of questioning. And it was in 2006, and it was right around the time that Jenny McCarthy came out with her book. And I remember thinking, like, I don't have time to worry about that. I'm in survival mode. People who have time to worry about whether or not vaccinations are going to cause autism for their children don't have real problems. That's literally what I thought. I was like, I have to just do what the medical system says. They know what they're doing, and I'm going to trust them.
Mm-hmm.
And every time she would get a vaccine, she would get a super high fever. She was on antibiotics, I think 7 times the first year of her life before she was 1 year old.
Mm-hmm.
So we just continued doing the thing, whatever. And then life goes on, colicky baby, very difficult in many, many ways. And then we get pregnant again. And I'm in fear of having another baby early, having the whole, situation we have, having to go through it again. So I get the flu vaccine because I'm afraid of the flu. I'm just trusting everything. This is just my personal story. Miley gets the flu vaccine. And I remember the night that we gave it to her. She was 2.5 years old. Now, 2 years and 9 months. Now, up until this part, she never had any signs of asthma. She was a colicky baby, but she wasn't like really sick all the time other than ear infections. When I stopped nursing her, because she was sensitive to dairy and wheat, and we didn't know. When I stopped nursing her, she was actually really healthy for 1.5 years. Like, she actually didn't get sick for 1.5 years. The night that we gave her this vaccine, I can remember 105 fever, laying in her bed and shaking, like convulsing. And I remember Chris and I just looking at her and just like, look what she's doing. Like, that's not right. That's not normal. And I just had this feeling in my stomach, like, oh, I don't think that was the right choice. But still in the place of trusting, still in the place of fear. And so what ended up unfolding within a few weeks is all of a sudden we went from this child who never had any signs of asthma to severe asthma for an entire year, like breathing treatments every 2 to 4 hours for an entire year, which is not normal. There were days where she'd be in school and I would get called to come pick her up, and I would see an ambulance on the road thinking that it was for her, just hoping that it wasn't hers. There were every single night awake, laying in bed, just holding her, watching her lungs just struggling to capture air. That was part of it. The second part was what was going on with her gut, that she was diagnosed with Crohn's disease as a 3-year-old, which is not what they do. So all of a sudden we were in health crisis mode again, and it was way worse than it had ever been before. And that's when I found you. So I didn't even know that you did work with vaccines in the beginning.
Right.
You would, Tony's one of those people, when we were in session, I was always learning. So as you were working, you were teaching, and I was just soaking everything in all the time because you were such a gifted healer, and you cared, and you were just so good at what you did. I was always learning. I mean, you were part of what inspired me to become a healer myself. And, I just was so grateful for all of our experiences and everything that I learned. And you were always very mindful of the words that you used. And as we would do the work together, as we would do biofeedback, there was clear energy patterns that would indicate that there was genetically mutated, modified flu virus that would just keep coming up, like in this biofeedback, which I have learned biofeedback never lies. Like it was always right. And so I would hear it, and you would just so gently just share with me, like, well, what can happen in the body is,
Blah, blah, blah.
yeah, and you would just share, and I would just listen, and I would just receive. And at some point in time, I started to realize that everything that I was doing, I was trying to do. She was on 6 prescription drugs at the age of 3 when we first came to see you, and we'd been to every specialist on every floor of Nemours, and I just felt so hopeless. And you just never gave up. You could see her as an individual, not for whatever symptoms she was just having. And as I listened, I remember just coming into my own discerning moment of like, okay, Miley, my daughter, is not to be treated like everybody else. Like, I want to trust the system, but there is value in a holistic approach. And so I think what I want to say is what you and I are here to share today is that in every decision that we make, whether it's nutrition, whether it's the treatment, whether it's a vaccine, whether it's what school you put your kids into, or whatever it is, it should always be about the patient and not the symptom or the disease.
Right.
And so vaccines is another platform or opportunity to discern what we think is best. And as I say that, what that means is you can't know a choice unless you have the information. And so this is a place to share information on what that looks like.
Well, I think it's a good place just to talk about it because it's such a complex thing. There's so many different aspects to this. And most of us don't even think about it until, well, at least in the past, nobody really thought about it until all of a sudden you have a baby in your arms and you're faced with the decision, or not really the decision, you're faced with the doctor saying, okay, now it's time to give vaccines. And you hadn't really thought about it before. And once you have the baby, you really don't have time to think about it. And obviously there's many reasons why we trust the system and why we trust traditional medicine. We trust science. We're all in love with science. We're mesmerized by the technology, and that's all okay. But it's a topic that, especially now, as things have evolved over the past at least 20 years since I've been in it, we're kind of getting to a critical point here, and that's kind of one of the things that I want to talk about. But I think that one of the reasons why we don't understand, we're in a place of, I guess, ignorance, is because this whole paradigm really started to come of age in the 60s. Okay, that's my generation. And mass vaccination programs only started in the 60s. That's not that long ago. That's 50 years, right? And so back in the 60s, there were 3 vaccines that we got. And then, well, I would say, let me go back to the 50s, because when I was born in the 50s, the polio vaccine came out. And so, but it was really that evolution between that time period to where we are today. And that's really the perspective that we need, because it's changed so much since then. And I'm not going to go into it's fairly easy enough to look at the timeline and say, oh, okay, well, the 50s was the polio vaccine, and then in the 60s it was the measles vaccine and the mumps vaccine, and single vaccines were being introduced. And then at the end of can't remember now if it was 69 or 79, but at any rate, well, then they started combining vaccines in one of the but anyway, so all of those things you can it's easy enough to look up. But the point I'm trying to make is that concurrent with this evolution of introducing more and more vaccines into the childhood vaccination schedule was the change of the paradigm. So in other words, the paradigm 50 years ago was you get your vaccine and you're protected from the disease. And so that's what we all grew up with. That, you repeat something often enough and then you start believing it. And so the whole vaccine program is predicated on get your vaccine and you'll be protected. That's what the whole purpose of it is. And that's easy enough to accept, because supposedly polio was eradicated and smallpox was eradicated, and that we're eradicating all these diseases that we used to have. And of course now, in the past couple of years, with a few measles cases that have popped up, all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, measles is coming back because people aren't getting their measles vaccine. And so it becomes very complicated and confusing for people to understand. And I think, I think it's important to, number one, keep it as simple as possible and try to understand what the fundamental issues are here. And number two is to kind of take an introspective look at, what are your beliefs about that? Let's face it, the word that is used by, I'll just call it the system or the, conventional medicine, is immunization. Immunize, you must immunize, you must immunize, you must, they prefer to use, language is powerful, right? And so choosing the word immunization gives you the impression that this is exactly what you're doing. But the proper word is vaccination, because you can go back into the whole history of immunization, and you can talk about the difference between lifelong immunity and temporary immunity. And if people don't know this, what they need to know is that you're never going to get lifelong immunity from a vaccine. You will only get lifelong immunity by getting the infection naturally. So that's kind of a truth that,
kind of an important truth to understand.
Truth, right? To understand that it doesn't matter how many vaccines you get, how many boosters you get, the body's natural.
Hence the need for boosters.
Right, hence the need. So, but the reason that it's always only temporary is because, the other truth is that the body is designed to get rid of whatever that is that's in your system. Whereas the immunity that you get from natural infection is a totally different pathway. It's the difference between conventional warfare and modern warfare. In the old days, conventional warfare, all the battles were fought at the border. Okay. And so while the enemy was at the border, You had messengers going back to the central command station saying, here's the enemy, this is what their weapons are, this is how big they are. There was a communication network so that by the time, if that enemy ever was able to get beyond the fortification, then the central command had the time and the resources and the knowledge about the intruder, about the evil pathogen, whatever. It had the time. That's the immune system, right?
And everybody's immune system is going to respond differently.
Well, basically it responds the same, but you're going to have different genetic and constitutional factors that are going to factor into it. Okay. So that was conventional warfare. Well, vaccination is a totally radically different way. It's modern warfare where now we have bombs, we have rockets.
It's like the sniper sneaking in underneath, right?
And so
not going through the defense system.
Right. And the other truth is that whether you're talking about natural infection or infection by injection, there will always be an allergic reaction. That is the basis for the vaccine working. That allergic reaction is what creates the efficacy of a vaccine. And so you can be certain 100% that it doesn't matter what you're injecting, there will be an allergic reaction because we're miraculously designed with an immune system that operates the way it does on the basis of conventional warfare. We were not designed to have nuclear bombs going off inside our body when we don't even expect it to happen. And so the way that the immune system has to respond is totally different, because when the battle is on at the border conventionally, there's a lot of people are getting shot up, and there's artillery and there's tanks and there's burning buildings and all kinds of destruction is going on out there. But in the meantime, the purity of the inside is protected. But now you have boom, all of a sudden it's shock. I mean, think about it. When you drop bombs, wherever you're dropping them, people don't see them coming. And then when they explode, all of a sudden the first thing is shock. And this is exactly what happens. And so now all of a sudden, you cannot fight the battle the same way, because if you're trying to get rid of the enemy when it's inside, you're going to shoot you're going to shoot holes in vital tissue, and you're going to have blood spurting here and there. And I mean, you can't manage the crisis the same way.
The central command center. Right. It's like you just got hit.
Right. So I think that what I encourage people to do is, again, there's certain simple little truths that are undeniable. So A is that immunization is vaccination, because they use vaccines to immunize. So that process is vaccination. Well, let's call a spade a spade. A vaccination is infection by injection, because that's what you're doing. You're infection by injection instead of infection by the environment. And whether or not it creates any type of immunity whatsoever in the end, you can be sure that you've got two things that you need to worry about. One is the allergic reaction that will happen to varying degrees. And the other one is, what it's going to do to you, to your individual, package, who you are, what your weaknesses are, what your strengths are, and things like that. So it's really it's interesting, because the whole notion of vaccination is a population-based strategy to control infectious disease. But what happens when you vaccinate is totally
an
individual.
individual experience.
It's totally individual.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one reason why the science is difficult to prove on this side, because it's never the
There's
same.
Too many variables.
There's too many variables.
Mm-hmm.
And but they get to say what science is, and they get to say that they have their scientific studies, and it's very difficult to actually prove. So what do? Well, we can say, well, gosh, my child had all the, the developmental milestones. They were looking at me in the eye. They were even talking, this and that and the other thing. And all of a sudden, within 48 hours, we lost them. They were gone.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing. Oh, well, that doesn't prove anything.
Yeah.
And so this is the rabbit hole that we get stuck in, is it because suddenly we got to prove this. We got to prove that this happened and that this is the reason why it happened. And so like one of the dilemmas is that, the paradigm as it developed through the 50s and 60s was that, if you don't vaccinate, you're going to get the infectious disease and die. I mean, that's basically the message. Okay. And then when we were faced with, well, golly, I'm not sure I want to do this. I'm not sure that makes sense to me.
Which was probably when I became a parent.
To be injecting. And keep in mind that at this point, we still don't even know what's in the vaccine. But we're starting to think, is this really, we start to kind of question this. But so, I lost my train of thought here. But
so the paradigm now, where would you say where we are today?
So when you get to, so the paradigm successfully implanted in our psyche that if you don't get the vaccine, you're going to die from the infectious disease.
Right.
Okay, so here was that fear over here.
Mm-hmm.
But once you started questioning about whether or not, I don't know about this. But now you have the fear that, well, if I don't vaccinate, I'm going to get the disease and I'm going to die. And I would say that even today,
100%.
It's 2020, happening. People are still dealing with this. Well, if I don't do this, I'm going to die, or my child's going to die. And they're the way things are going, they're being very successful at accusing of us people who don't vaccinate as being baby killers. Because now not only are you killing your own child, and of course this is projecting that you're killing your own child by not vaccinating, you're also killing other people because you're not doing it. It's just crazy. And so it gets to be not only a culture of fear both ways. Now we got, the person who doesn't vaccinate has to deal with both fears. The fear of well, if I vaccinate,
then my kid's going to end up sick.
And if I don't vaccinate, they're going to die because they're going to get the disease. So there's all these like conflicts. And again, most people don't think about these things until you have a baby, and you don't have time to research once you have a baby because, so, and then the other problem is that, this is turning into kind of it's turning into a war.
I would say it's turning into an issue of human rights. That's how it feels for me. I should be able to choose the schedule that works for me, which one works for me, if I want to do it, I believe. Now, I understand the overall herd immunity idea. I get that. But it feels to me like the data is being overlooked that should be specific. There could be some testing that could be done even to see if this person's immune system can tolerate this. My daughter was born 7 weeks early, and she was given extra vaccines for RSV every month for 8 months. And her lungs weren't developed when she was born. She was given all these extra immunizations, when in fact, what might have served her better would be to have waited and spread them out until her immune system was stronger. So I often share in one of the episodes that I recorded about allergies is, and I might have even learned this from you, that allergies are really just a disorganized immune system. So when we are reacting to the pollen, the food, the world around us, what it really is an internal battle that's happening first that breaks down our ability to create, we talk about in Chinese medicine, keeping the qi of the patient stronger than the qi of
the
pathogen. So that's what we're talking about here, is understanding that every human being is different based on their constitution. So their energetic constitution. And even when we started to talk about this, we identified that my children were different constitutionally. And so that maybe the path for each of them could look different. And that's what I wish that I was hearing from, I guess, my pediatrician or physician, is that recognizing that every child is different and then coming up with a plan that works.
Wouldn't it be nice if it worked that way? Because, right, in reality, until you come from a place of total confidence in what you know about health or your child or medicine or whatever, it would be perfectly normal and natural to consider that you might want to have a vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, vaccine policy is all or none. That's the way it's always been.
Which is another, it's another paradigm shift I feel like we're experiencing, because there are exemptions available, which we'll get into. There's the medical, the religious, and the philosophical that vary by state.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's kind of a way of like, giving you the opt out. But as you said, where we are now is if you're opting out, you're opting totally out. And yeah, what would be nice is if I could say, I don't know that my child needs Hep B if I don't have it. They're not sexually active. How
Right.
Exactly, like, educate us on how this infectious disease is transmitted, and is it really necessary for this particular one to happen at this moment in time?
Right.
That would be wonderful.
Right.
And I'm wondering if you would be willing just to share a little bit about, we talked about how vaccines can disrupt the immune system, but I'm wondering if you can educate us on how they do work, what the theory is behind, or what their theory is in creating, because I want the listeners to feel what the theory was in creating the schedule that they created, even if it's hard to understand. There was a theory behind why we have booster vaccines, why we have to do the boosters. If we don't do the boosters, does the original vaccine work? I don't know if you remember 5 years ago when it was homeschooling. Remember when we were in Nicaragua?
Mm-hmm.
My daughter got bit by a monkey.
Yes.
And I was like, I was 2 hours from a hospital, and I was at this yoga teacher training, and they were like, oh, you have to get the rabies vaccine right now. And I was like, no way. This isn't a one-time thing. This is a series of vaccines. Like, how does this even work? So I think what I'm asking is, can you just kind of give us some basic information? From my perspective, what I see is, I saw this image of like a push pin with a bunch of needles in it, like a sewing pin, like the red tomato you think of from when I was a kid. And there was 7 to 12 push pins in it. And then, fast forward 40 years later, it's like 43. So
76.
By the age of what?
Well,
12?
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So
within the first year of life now, it's 26 within 12
26
months.
Within the first year of life.
So actually, so if you think of childhood vaccines as getting the vaccines that you need in order to go to kindergarten. Okay, so that's
you're just
5 years.
Right. You're doing it right.
So if you were to spread all those vaccines out, the current schedule, you would be giving your child one vaccine a month for 5 years.
If they weren't combined.
If they weren't combined, and you were going to take one at a time.
So 12 a year.
To get all of them in by the
60,
time of age 5, they would be getting one vaccine every month. So we don't really think about that. When you break it down, you think it that way, you think, wow, that's a lot of vaccines. That's one every single month. Now, I always like to say to people, what do you think the number is? What's the magic number that suddenly for you it becomes too much?
When they get sick. That's what it was for me.
Right.
But we don't want everybody.
But what is the magic number? It doesn't.
No, that is what it is. When do people decide to eat healthy? When they get cancer.
Right.
I mean, I've lived in this world I can't tell you how many times people come to me, after they've been following me for years and now they have cancer. It's like, so what we want to do today is provide information to be proactive rather than reactive, to inform them with information. So I want to just ask about that. First of all, let's just discern the information that not all of the vaccines that are given are totally necessary. First of all, the flu vaccine is optional and not even very successful. It has a very low success rate. Even the CDC said less than 30%, I think, if even that. So we're not talking about that. And then there's the childhood ones that are on the schedule.
DPT and polio.
Okay, but let's take pneumococcal, the pneumonia, right?
Or chicken pox or
I had chicken pox, right? Okay, rotavirus my kid didn't even have. We luckily, she was born right before that, or kind of around that time. She got rotavirus. It was awful. She lost a lot of weight. She threw up for 2 weeks. It was terrible, but she survived. It's okay. And she'll never get it again. And so here's, I think of strep throat too. You put 10 people in a closed elevator with strep throat, and 3 people are going to get really, really sick, and 3 people are not going to get sick, and 4 people might carry it, but they might not have symptoms. Right. And it's why don't we stop and ask why that's happening? And realize that it's all about the person's immune system and what they're genetically sensitive to, but we don't stop and think about the different reactions that people are having to vaccines. Right. So what is the theory in creating vaccine schedules?
Well, it's pretty arbitrary, and I couldn't tell you why they have the schedule that they do, except that that in a way it's in order to get all the vaccines that they want in by a certain time. I can't answer that technically, why the schedule is what it is, but
why would they say that you need a booster 2 months later? What could be happening in the body that your body is all of a sudden building up these immunities, right? And so now we need to put more in to make sure,
just remember the efficacy of vaccines is based on titers. It's based on antibody production. And so if in the clinical trials or in real life or whatever, if that's not happening, if they're still having outbreaks or the person's getting the disease or whatever, then it's well, we're not
then we
getting
need
the
boosters.
The titers are where, they might have titers 10 days after the shot, but because of the way the immune system works, maybe 2 years later, they don't have the titers anymore. They don't have the antibodies anymore because that's the body's trying to.
And everybody's going to be different.
Right.
And isn't it interesting that we even have to have that to prove the efficacy of the vaccine?
Yeah, wouldn't it be nice if they said, hey, before we give this vaccine, why don't we take titers and see if you have the immunity already? But we don't do that. And
so I did that with my daughter when I was at a point of discerning which way I was going to go before kindergarten. Mm-hmm. And at kindergarten she still had all the titers for all of them, for not even having been vaccinated for at that point probably 3 years. Mm-hmm. So and I don't even think parents know that that's an option. So as we're talking about it, I just want to share that is an option.
It's an option if you have the option to spread them out or maybe change the schedule. But as far as policy goes, you really don't have the option. You're still going to get them all. You might get them on a different schedule, but it's all or nothing. You're either going to get them all. And, up until mid 80s, there weren't that many vaccines. And now there are so many, I said, one every month for 5 years. If
you do the first, let's just say Hep A vaccine, and then I don't even know what the booster is on it. Maybe it's even Hep A, okay, or just any of them. So any that have boosters that are required, like 3 or 4, which I know those two do, and you only do one and you don't do the rest. What is the risk involved with that?
I couldn't tell you what the risk is. Again, it really depends on the person. It depends on the individual. Everybody has a different
You've
risk.
initiated some sort of immune response, yet the CDC believes that in order to continue that response in the body, you need a booster 6 months later.
Right.
So I guess for parents listening, because I've been asked the question before, well, I started, but I didn't finish. Does my child have any immunity at all? And
gotta have titers taken.
They would have to have a titer, but I would believe that they might have some immunity because they've had,
it depends on the individual.
Yeah.
But, once again, it's really easy to go down, and these are all appropriate questions, and it's appropriate to be thinking about these things.
But at the end of the day, what?
The end of the day is that if you vaccinate, you're getting all the vaccines.
Yeah.
And if you choose not to vaccinate, I think there was a period of time when you could pick and choose depending on your pediatrician. And you could maybe get away with not doing one or something or other. But again, at the end of the day, you got to hand in that immunization record that's, being checked to make sure that you got all of them. So the fact that you can pick and choose is really a misnomer. It's kind of misleading, for people to think that they can do that. They can only do that in a very limited way. At the end of the day, you still need to have all the vaccines by law for school admissions. So up until this point, currently, the only law that requires vaccines is K through 12, the statute 10323 or one. Can't remember the number of the statute right now, but all the states have their school immunization statute, which is all basically the same. Now, think about this. These laws came into existence in the 60s because that's when the mass vaccination program started, and that's when the laws were introduced into the individual states to pass the law that the students had to have the vaccines in order to be admitted into school. But at that time, they provided for medical exemptions, obviously because some people were harmed, right? And religious exemptions because the Constitution protects religious freedom. And then there were some states had philosophical exemptions as well.
Are there still states with philosophical exemptions?
Yeah, not very many, but in Florida, we've never had the philosophical exemption. And in the 20 years that I was doing this work, of course, way back then, a common question that I would always get is, we need a philosophical exemption. We need a philosophical exemption because I'm not really very religious. I have a very strong philosophical belief about this because I believe in conservationism. I believe in, healthy living and blah, 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 blah. I believe in all that, but I'm not really very religious. Well, in order to bring a bill before the legislature for something like that takes a lot of time, takes a lot of energy, takes a lot of people. It's not easy just to say, okay, let's introduce this philosophical exemption bill. So my response back then was, well, I understand, and I wish we did too, because I had come from California previously, and I had that option of having a philosophical exemption, because at that time I wasn't sure that I was all that, because you don't know, well, does my religion say I can or shouldn't or should, you don't really know. I mean, your spiritual journey is a journey. You don't always know everything back when you're 20 and 30 years old, right? I mean, it's a journey. So philosophical makes sense because you feel, you know what your belief system is philosophically. You may not have had a very good religious whatever. But so what I used to say to people was, well, it'd be great to have a philosophical exemption. I hope someday we can do that. But but we do have a philosophical exemption. It's called the religious exemption.
Right.
And so at any rate, when the laws were first introduced and passed in states to implement this massive vaccination program back in the 60s, it included those exemptions because they were recognized as being valid.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But now,
where are we now?
Yeah, where are we now? Where we are now, I never ever dreamed that we would be here, but we are. And as you are probably aware, in California, mm-hmm. they got rid of their philosophical exemption and their religious exemption, and now this year they just got rid of their medical exemption. And then New York State followed in its footsteps, and now Florida is on this precipice of losing our religious exemption as well. And unfortunately, if Florida falls for this and allows this to happen, this is not where it stops. The whole country will fall, and it will not stop with children. In fact, the 50-year evolution of the Healthy People program, which is the federal government's agenda for public health, for 50 years has been heading in this direction. Every 10 years, they have their goals and their focuses, and it's always the same. This is the direction that we're heading into, and it's not just the children, because I don't know if you've noticed, but there's 86 vaccines recommended for adults, and that will be the next thing as soon as they can get rid of religious exemption. Because one of the things in the past 20 years, most of the work initially was people having trouble getting their religious exemption. By and large, there weren't a lot of problems. And there was a Bureau of Immunization that you could call and say, Duval County is denying my religious exemption. And the Bureau of Immunization would call Duval County and say, you can't do that. And in Florida, actually, and I'm sorry, I'm kind of jumping around a little bit here, but we were fortunate enough to have a court case in 1998 where a single mother was denied her religious exemption. She had her religious exemption, but the school decided that it wasn't valid. So the school was stepping in. Its role traditionally, when everything was paper, its role traditionally was simply just to be a record keeper. Okay, I got the record. I got the immunization record, or I have this religious exemption certificate, or I have this medical exemption. So we got it in the student's file. And then every fall, the Bureau of Immunization would come in and make sure that every student had something, okay? But now here was a case where the school decided that, oh yeah, she's got a religious exemption, but we don't believe it's sincere. Mm-hmm. And so she took it, to court, and we had a very, very win-win situation there where, the court said, not only did the court say, hey, the law is very explicit, and the state has no authority or even any expertise to decide what is a religious belief and what is not a religious mm-hmm. belief. So the law is clear, and you cannot, you can't deny it, and B, as a school, you can't make a judgment about. So not only was that a win-win situation, and the court ordered the Department of Health to change their forms. You no longer had to write in what denomination of religion you belong to, and no explanations, because the court interpreted it properly mm-hmm. and clarified it. And unfortunately, ever since then, I don't know why people don't go back and use that case as precedence. But anyway, so fast forward, now we're at a situation where
we're at risk of losing this.
We're losing it. We're
so
going to lose
for
it,
the people who are listening at this point in time, what would you encourage them to do? If this is not an issue about whether to vaccinate or not to vaccinate, but to have a choice in the say of whether you are going to or not, which is what this is about, our human right to do this, which ultimately means whether you do or you don't. And if we're about to lose that right, possibly in the state of Florida, what are the options? Is it protected by homeschoolers? Is it, can we go to our congressman? Like, what can people do who are listening? Specifically, I'm probably referring mostly to the state of Florida.
Well, unfortunately, I'll tell you what, we just have so many things going against us because, again, 20 years ago, when people would say, well, I'm not really very religious, it's like, well, what is your belief about this? I mean, what is it? And, the one thing that I had a lot of confidence in was the fact that your belief, if it was sincere, was
enough.
It was a philosophical, religious,
and you had the right
belief,
because in our country we have the freedom to,
and so that you're protected. You have that. The Constitution protects that. But then what happened? I think it was in 2014.
Yes,
maybe a little bit. 5 or 6 years ago.
5 years ago.
Well, now all of a sudden the Catholic Church decides that they're not going to accept religious exemption. I got to tell you something. I almost had a nervous breakdown over that because I could not believe that the moral authority for a church whose fundamental tenet is you must act according to your moral conscience, whether you agree with us or not. If it's your moral conscience, that's what you must do. Well, now all of a sudden, this is the one thing that they make an exception on. And not only do they make an exception, but now they're throwing out families and students from their churches, their church schools. And it's like, so, obviously, this is an example of corruption within, because how do you do that? So
what can we do right now there are people listening who want to keep, I don't want to say fighting this, but they want to hold the belief that they have and have the right to choose what's best for their children.
Well, what I was going to say is that even if you are pro-vaccine and you love them and you want them, you should still be willing to understand and accept that that we have a basic fundamental need,
for individual.
Well, informed consent is the basis of a moral society. If you don't have that, you're not a moral society anymore. So even, but the problem is what's happening is that because of the influence of the language being used in the fear tactics and the thing that coincides with all that is a government healthcare system that is unfolding before our eyes for lots of different reasons, but it's a government sanctioned and enforced healthcare system that is predicated on two things. And again, I'm kind of going off on a tangent, but the federal healthcare program agenda is predicated on infectious disease control and chronic disease control.
I'm laughing because we know that contributes to the chronic disease control,
and so
it's counterintuitive.
The way that their goal to control infectious disease, of course, is to enforce and improve vaccination rates, because that is the the science,
which might be an underlying cause
right,
for chronic disease.
And well, right, but as I was researching, all of this public health policy, the trends, and where is all this coming from, and where's the policy coming from? Because you can't have policy unless without legal authority. So it all goes back to, well, what's the law say? You can have any policy you want, but what's the law say? Well, so that was kind of the basis for the first 15 years, and then all of a sudden it was doesn't matter what the law says, now it's all policy. And it's pretty frightening.
So I have a lot of people who are listening today that want to know what's coming next and what they can do. So really, let's just say, what are our choices? Do we have to move to Costa Rica? Do we have to homeschool our kids? If this is something that we are discerning in the moment, that we want to say that we want to have the right to choose how and when we vaccinate our children. Well, do we reach out to the congressman and express our views? In this moment in time, there are 10 faces that I can see with conversations that I had where people are paralyzed in their fear because changes are happening. They don't know where they stand. Their pediatricians are showing up differently. Things have shifted over the past couple of years. What are the choices going to be? What is this really saying about what the future holds for us? And how are we going to have self-responsibility? And I want to get into, by the way, as we wrap up, alternative beliefs from Chinese medicine, just to share with listeners other possibilities that they may not even know of. And I also want to ask you about your personal experience. I want to tap into those two things before we wrap up, because why you're so passionate about this, because somebody doesn't just decide to dedicate 20 years of their life to, vaccine policy because they just don't have enough things to do, right? That's not the way it works. Exactly. So, and you don't even do this nobody even knows you're doing this. Like, you've spent so much of your life passionately being involved in this work for the need to express, just our own human right to choose what's best for us. And you've been heavily involved in this. So I want to talk about those two things. But really, right now in this point of time, what today is October 1st, 2019, what is the reality of what might happen, and what are our choices going to be, and what can we do?
Okay. Well, right now, Senate Bill 64 was pre-filed long before the next legislative session, which begins in January. And SB 64 is removing religious exemption and also creating a panel, not of doctors, but of state officials, to review all the medical exemptions that have been written and to create a system of deciding what qualifies as a medical exemption.
And how hard is it to get a medical exemption?
It's pretty darn hard.
It is pretty darn hard.
Pretty darn hard. And it used to be that if you had a reaction from one vaccine, then it was advised. I mean, it was kind of like, well, okay, they can't really handle the allergic reaction from vaccines.
This was my situation.
Right. So then you were automatically exempt from all vaccines because it was obvious that you had a problem with the allergic reaction that all vaccines cause. Mm-hmm. Okay. But it has since changed in the last 5 years. And now, if you almost die from a vaccine, your medical exemption will be temporary and it will only apply to that vaccine. So it's totally changed. So the policy is.
But if you have an old one, is it still doctored in?
Well, I can't answer that for sure, but I can tell you with certainty that SB 64 is on its way to being passed.
Which is the medical exemption.
Which is the medical exemption.
Okay.
And the reason why I say it's on its way to being passed is because last year, there was a bill, HB 213, which was a mandatory tracking and surveillance system. It's basically, they're basically already doing it, but the bill actually legalized it and authorized it and said, hey, it's okay. Not only is it okay, but we want you to have a electronic data record on every single person in the country. Okay. And the purpose of the medical record is, number one, to track vaccine compliance, and then to be able to use that data to then create intervention strategies. Whatever the data is okay, here's a group or here's a person or whatever, however they want to look at the data, and then to be able to, which by the way, I believe it was in 2010, where the home visit was a new intervention. And so that's all set up for a vaccine team to come and knock on your door and say, oh, by the way, so it's all set up and it's all been planned this way over the last 50 years. But so
January comes.
So January comes, and I referred to 213 last year because even though it was like, you got to be kidding me. You're going to track my medical data without my informed consent? Yes, that's exactly what we're going to do. And 213 made it mandatory for all doctors, providers. They have to enter medical data into the electronic medical database. Okay, they have no choice. So that basically makes them agents of the state. And the whole reason that it's mandatory, there's only one justification for anything to be mandatory, and that is for surveillance reasons. So not only does the bill that was passed require mandatory tracking on children and also adults, because that's where we're heading, but it also tracks the doctor's performance. And this is why you're seeing changes.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Pediatricians.
Because now
pediatricians that used to say, yeah, we'll do it on schedule, we're okay. Well, no, now they are tracked too. So they're basically becoming.
So if a child dies from meningitis and they're a patient of a certain doctor, like there's probably some fear there again. Like now it's being tracked. Like you knew this child wasn't.
Well, what's being tracked is, are they vaccinated?
Exactly. Right. And so then it falls into
is the doctor vaccinating?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But at any rate, so see, everything sets the stage for the next thing. So last year it was 213. It was this mandatory tracking system. And believe me, there was a lot of opposition, and the opposition is based on the fundamental human right to informed consent. And the extension of that is medical freedom. Okay. But the basic thing is the fundamental moral need for informed consent. It doesn't matter whether you love vaccines or hate vaccines.
Yeah, so I want you to just say that one more time, because I think it's really important for the listeners to receive that.
So the fundamental problem, the fundamental issue is informed consent. Everything else.
Which means what? It means your right to know.
Your right to know and your right to decline, that you are not forced to do anything.
Right, which is not what happened to me when my daughter was given the Hep B without my permission, right?
So in answer to your question, and I'm sorry this is a long answer to a simple question, but so 213 is passed. There was a lot of opposition, and there were only 2 legislators who voted nay. Everybody else. And so this
is the state of Florida.
This is the state of Florida. And so now this year we have the bill to restrict medical exemptions and get rid of religious exemption. And we're going, well, wait a minute. They weren't listening to us last year. They weren't listening to us say, it's your job to protect our rights. It's not your job
as a parent,
to provide health care. You can, but it can't trump individual rights. So, but this is where it's going. And so in answer to what can we do? Well, we have to get through. Individuals have to get through to their district legislators and say, you need to vote against this bill, because once it passes, there's no return. Okay,
So
then
who are the district legislators in Florida?
well, it's very easy. Just
Where do they
all
find
you
this
have to do, it
information?
depends on what district you're in,
Mhm.
because it's a state thing.
Is there
So
a
it's not-
website? Is there a phone
well,
number?
you can just Google "find my legislator" and put your zip code in, and it'll tell you, here's the people you need to call. These are your legislators in your district. Those legislators go to Tallahassee and they vote on all these bills.
Mhm.
Okay, and as a matter of fact, every district in this state right now, the legislators are having little town hall meetings, and you can find out when the meeting is, and you can go and you can talk to the legislator there. But that has to be done. That has to be done, because that's the only way to stop it. The only way to influence the future is to stop these bills. And in terms of what other options you have, yes, you can homeschool. You can take your child out of the system, because there is only one law that requires vaccines, which, by the way, I want to just add that for years, for decades, probably a good 20 years, the post-secondary school system, the colleges and the universities, and this was really, if there were problems, the problems were coming from those schools requiring vaccines and denying religious exemption, when in fact there was no authority, there was no statute, there was no requirement, there was no legal requirement or authority for schools, colleges to require vaccines. So anyway, that was something that we were able to change.
Yeah,
so now
celebrate.
Your child gets to go to college in the state of Florida and not be badgered with, you have to have these vaccines. They changed their policy from required vaccines to recommended vaccines. And they said, if you have a religious or philosophical reason for declining the recommended vaccines, it's okay. You get to do that. That's the way it should be. That's the way it should be for everything.
We're okay with it once they're adults, but
see, here's the catch. That is because of the way the law is currently. But now we have a law that's going to take away religious exemption altogether.
So that'll affect college as well.
And the next thing will be adult vaccines. Mm-hmm. Right now they're recommended, but they're going to be required.
But so you've got
people all over the place who make up their own policies. You got employers, you got camp directors, you got people saying, oh no, you can't do this unless you have this vaccine. They don't even know what the law is, but they think that they can tell you what you need to do. So
what is the reality of the future in, like, what's at stake here? So in other words, it doesn't matter to me, should I choose not to vaccinate my child if I just don't even need to go to the doctor anymore? If you know what I mean? Like, nobody's tracking it. I don't go, they don't know, but.
Yeah, but how many people can do that?
Well, thankfully me.
Well, thankfully me.
Because I've been on a health journey, and I've become empowered in what's, what's best for my children. And we still do our annual checkups, but just to check off the list. And what happens if they go to the emergency room? Can, at this point in time, they be turned away, or is that at risk for the future? Because that, to me, is when I say, you never know what's going to happen. Catastrophic. I mean, my health insurance is purely catastrophic because I no longer depend on it. So what is at stake for the future? Because it is like this in there are other countries, and this is, in other countries, you don't exactly get the medical care you need until it is paid for upfront in cash. That happens. Our country isn't like that. They will see you. They will take care of you. But is there a risk of, if you're not vaccinated, they'll turn you away?
Well, not right now.
Yeah. So that's kind of like, those are the kind of the risks those are the risks that so what's at risk right now is our education.
Well, I think that, I think when you're dealing at the emergency room level, their priorities are quite different than the pediatrician's priorities and other doctors. So their job is,
crisis management.
Once that patient is stabilized, they're moved out of the emergency room and the ICU. They're moved out of there, and now it's somebody else's job to take over.
Right.
So they have a very narrow, focus
concern.
on, yeah. So, but here's something that people probably are not aware of. This is another change that was kind of slipped underneath the board along the way. And that is that, again, they changed the language.
Right.
And so it used to be that when you are in an emergency room, obviously there's all kinds of biological things that happen. There's antibiotics, there's, whatever. And so they decided to slip vaccines under the biologic, name. So when you go to an emergency room and you sign your informed consent that whatever it takes to save me, okay. I accept that, no liability or whatever. So now that vaccines fall under that category, they don't have to ask you. So
if you sign when you go to the emergency room.
If you sign for the other biologics. So what people need to know is that just make sure that you have your own little statement saying, I accept biologics, but I do not accept vaccinate. Do not vaccinate me. But this is what it's coming down to. Something else that you said that I just brought up that I forgot to mention, but it'll come up. Okay. So
the next question I wanted to ask you is, we touched a little bit on, and I love Chinese medicine. You're a doctor of Chinese medicine. This is really the root of your practice here locally in Jacksonville, Florida, which of course includes many, many other things. And we talked about, and what I've learned in my own journey is that at the end of the day, there is this sort of like, none of this or all of this matters, in the way that like what really matters is, as you said, keeping the chi of the patient stronger than the chi of the pathogen. And so what I learned from you in my journey, the thing that always stuck with me when I used to live in fear of the swine flu and strep throat and every flu virus that came around, because it would just take my daughter down for weeks and we would be out of school. And it finally stuck with me that the only thing as a parent that I needed to do was everything I could to keep her immune system strong. And of course, for us, that did include some discernment on whether or not and when I would vaccinate her. All of that was a part of it, which is why we're talking about this today. But it includes many other things. It includes nutrition and stress and toxicity in our environment and in our home. It includes so many things. So Chinese medicine has a way of really understanding the patient in a way that is an individual. And I share this because I know that they're all alternative theories or alternative methods. I don't want to say alternative, or complementary, let's just say complementary ways to encourage resistance to, I don't know how to say this the right way, but like resistance, natural immunity to infectious diseases other than vaccinations. And I'm wondering if you would be willing to share some of those ideas that could be possible. Like, okay, so we know that we want to keep the immune system strong. So there's nutrition and herbs, but then there's also homeopathy. So if you could just share a little bit about what that looks like, what that can include, because some people never even knew that this was possible.
Well, keep in mind that infectious disease has been around since the beginning of time, and Chinese medicine has been around for thousands of years.
Yeah.
And back when it was developing, it was a time of lots of infectious diseases, and people basically lived in the environment. They didn't live in all these nice protected areas and things like that. But at any rate, so the whole basis of the principle is founded on that you have to keep the internal space pure. And that's very consistent with
religious
philosophical
exemption
and religious belief. It's like, hey, there's a reason we're designed the way that we are. And so in the process of taking an individual into account, what you need to do, you can't really treat somebody correctly until you know, well, it's just this, it's the same thing. It's like, well, where is it?
Peeling the layers.
Where and what does it look like, and that kind of thing, because again, everybody's different. I mean, I have a term that I call evolvement process. So after a vaccination or any really kind of trauma or any infection, doesn't have to be vaccination, it can be natural infection, regardless, after the initial allergic reaction and the shock, then you have an evolvement process, which is the body's, dealing with, what are we looking at here?
Mhm.
And do we have the resources? I mean, this is the body talking to itself.
Right.
Do we have the resources to, to manage this and get back to homeostasis? Because it's all about purity.
Mhm.
I mean, it's all about, the body is going to, it wants to be pure inside. It is going to, in some way, shape, or form, it's going to deal with the toxicity that's inside your body.
Mhm.
And one of the ways it deals with it is it creates cancer. Okay, because it has to neutralize something that it can't shoot up because of where it's at. It's in vital tissue, it's in vital parts of your body, so it has to be neutralized, and then over time that becomes a cancerous tumor or whatever. I mean, disease develops and disease is eliminated. It's the same kind of pathway, and the job of the physician is to try to understand where it is, what stage are we at, what are we looking at. It's a very individual thing because everybody's different. But so in terms of Chinese medicine, I mean, oh my gosh, there's all kinds of, with all infections, the first 24 hours is the most important time.
Yeah.
Okay. And in that first 24 hours, it doesn't really matter what name it is. It doesn't matter whether it's a flu or whether it's a meningitis or whether it's a cold. That doesn't matter. What matters is you got 24 hours to arrest the situation and get things turned around. 48 hours, 28, that time period.
Right.
That's your acute infection. So there's all kinds of things, as you know. It doesn't matter whether it's Western herbs or Chinese herbs or supplements
To support
or diet,
the immune system
or whatever. There's all kinds of things that lower temperatures and, improve immunity and all kinds of things. It's just, you can choose. You can pick and choose. But within homeopathy, there are your classic remedies that are plant-based usually, but there's also nosodes, which
tell us about those.
Well, those are homeopathic preparations of the actual disease. So, for example, you could take a streptococcinum, which is a nosode of the strep, and that's what you could take to counteract the strep infection. You could also use it just to treat a sore throat because it's all the same.
So is
thing
it
anyway.
is it the energy, the frequency in the?
It's the vibrational signature.
Yeah.
Right. So that's really into energetics. A lot of people don't get that. Kind of hard to talk about.
So my listeners do.
Okay.
We talk about energy and vibration in the way that our limiting beliefs show up, and how it shows up in so many areas of our life, and in the food that we eat. Right. Like every food has an energy. So, and I want to, but there's not just nosodes. Like, is there a way to program energy frequencies? You create, you actually just create remedies. You create remedies that absorb a signature, a vibration, a frequency for what it is that we need.
Yeah, because we have that technology now.
So tell me a little bit about how that works. So in other words, without getting too geeky and scientific, because not everybody will understand it at the very depth, but just breaking it down just in terms of energy, why this could be an option and how it could work in the body to create an immune response based on an energetic frequency versus an injection.
Well, the nice thing about doing, for example, like a clinical formula that might have a nosode in it, might have streptococcinum in it, might have influenza in it, might have mumps in it, might have whatever you want to put in there, that what you're putting in there is just the energetic profile of, and that's actually, back with the influenza epidemic of 1918, it was the people that used homeopathy that survived it. And there's a lot of data about that. But anyway.
So do you do nosode programs?
I do nosode programs, but I do a lot of clinical formulas that, because it's not just, you're not just trying to cancel out, that number, whatever it is, that signature. You're also trying to stimulate, immune function.
Immune response, right?
So, and there's great little remedies for that. There's all kinds of different things. Again, the reason why homeopathy, I think, is maybe not as popular as it should be is because it's another one of those things that's individual based.
And it's not tangible.
Right. It's not tangible. Whereas, Chinese medicine, which is also not real popular as it should be or could be, is more broad based. You got a formula that, is a cold and flu formula. It's more broad based. Whereas with homeopathy, especially with, potencies and clinical signatures and things like that, if you get the right one, it's like boom.
Yeah.
Boom.
Yeah.
But it's not an easy thing for people to do.
It's not a quick fix.
Well, it's not an easy thing for people to kind of figure out, because it's like, there might be 20 different things that say cough. All 20 things are for cough, but maybe your cough is just slightly different. So it gets a little complicated.
Well, and then there's always the layer underneath, right?
Right.
There's always where I just remember we were constantly dealing, because symptoms come up in energy medicine too. The symptoms, and then there's the underneath, and then that we just keep, peeling and peeling and peeling until we get to the root cause.
Right.
And so it's not an overnight fix.
Right. And, one of the questions that you asked early on that a lot of people will say, okay, well, in your clinical experience, are there certain people that should be vaccinated or shouldn't be vaccinated or whatever? My answer to that is, and of course, it's just empirical. It's based on my clinical experience, but it's also based on, the whole underlying system of knowledge that it's all predicated upon. But I will tell you that if you have blonde hair and blue eyes and you're blood type A,
constitutionally,
you have a high risk of having some immune issues. Now, I can't tell you exactly why. There's also a concept out there called connective tissue integrity.
Which you can see in your eyes
with iridology, right?
I studied
people. Yeah. People who have connective tissue like a nylon stocking, they can walk through the valley of death, and they might have exposure, but it's not going to get in,
Yeah.
So
just like food,
right.
They can eat whatever they want and they still feel amazing.
Right.
And if you're listening and you're a person who is really sensitive to food in your environment, you're probably going to be sensitive to medication as well. But this is such an important concept, because your energetic constitution is a huge part of it. It is your ability to receive and discern information as it's coming into your body, the frequency of, the vaccination or the homeopathy or whatever. And I studied iridology under Dr. Morrison. A lot of it is seen in your eye. So the eye color is totally a thing. And because all of your nerve endings come to an ending in your eye. So yeah.
There's so many different ways to understand yourself and to understand what your particular immunity situation is. So for example, in my case, my constitution is such that I could be one of those people that walks through the valley of death. But if you inject something into me, it will kill me, because I have a
good outer protection.
A good outer, but the inside, no. Now, I have some people who have a very strong constitutional. It's like, okay, they can be vaccinated. It doesn't mean that they're not going to have problems, or that they might not have problems down the road. But so, it comes down to that that what it boils down to is the moral necessity for informed consent. That's what it boils down to. Whether you love or hate vaccines, whether you want them all or you don't want any.
But then there's a second part that it's like learning to understand, also to learning to discern, just like we do with food.
Right.
That there is right now there is still a choice, and that what that can look like for you, like really, like we've talked about Constitution, like just paying attention to the reaction that your children might be having as I was witnessing and not, doing anything about it, even though it didn't feel right. And then, taking proactive steps. If you're going to choose to do this,
right,
have your kid drink green juice for 3 days before and 3 days after, because
I gotta tell a lot of people, you know what, I understand why you think you either need to vaccinate or why you want to vaccinate, but that doesn't negate the fact that it's going to injure you in some. There will be morbidity.
It is an immune response
in some way, shape, or form. So you can't deny that. But so I've never been about telling people you either have, don't do this, because first of all, I'm not going to take that responsibility. But it's your choice. It's your life, and so I mean, there's all kinds of things that you can learn about yourself and your family if you're going to get the vaccine, boy, I'd be doing some homeopathics before you do. I mean, there's nice little pre-vaccine kits for each shot. And basically what it does is, it notifies your nervous system, your endocrine immune neurological system to say, hey, this is what's coming.
Yeah.
So that it already has the information.
It's not like so much the shock.
It's not going to be a shock. It's not going to be this bomb that drops in the middle of, your living room.
And don't do it if your child is already sick.
And the nice thing about homeopathy is that, there's no side effects to it. I mean, you're not.
Homeopathy is wonderful, but at the same time, sometimes it's not strong enough to compete with pharmaceutical drugs. And,
it's not.
Yeah,
it's
right.
Not.
So it's more of a proactive, kind of consistent, long-term treatment versus like taking Tylenol for your headache. It doesn't work that way at all. It's
but it's just it's just a matter of taking charge of your. There was one thing that I was going to mention when we were talking about the evolution of healthy people and public health policy, and how things have changed, and how we've gone from 23 vaccines in the 80s to
70,
triple that now. Is that in 1986 Congress decided that doctors, providers, and manufacturing companies would not be sued for vaccine injuries and deaths. And that is pretty significant. I don't know that there's any other product anywhere that there's no liability. And so what we have a situation where not only are we about to lose religious exemption, but even
we're not holding anybody accountable.
Nobody's held accountable. And that's pretty significant. And I don't think people really understand that. They think that, well, first of all, I'm not going to be in the 2% that gets hurt. And if I get hurt, I'll just sue the manufacturer, whatever. No, you cannot do that. And so that was in 86. Well, right after 1986, the vaccine list went from this to this.
Well, yeah, because
three
now
columns.
The doctors don't have anything to.
There's absolutely no liability. And I think that's pretty significant. I think that, even if you love them and believe them and want them, I mean, that should be concerning to everybody. It's like,
somebody has to be accountable.
Right.
Somebody has to be.
Like, well, I mean, you cannot deny. I mean, the government has paid out over $4 billion in, vaccine damages. And so they issue a report every year that shows that,
how can people find that report?
It's not that hard to find. Well, I think it's the Department of Justice.
What's it called, the report?
It's the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. In other words, it's unfortunately it's totally volunteer. Doctors don't have to report adverse reactions, and of the ones that are reported, they estimate that maybe only 10% of all injuries are reported because it's volunteer. And then once they are reported, only a third of them actually end up being considered cases. So what that 1986 law did was it took the liability away from the administrators and the manufacturers and said, okay, well, the taxpayer is going to pay for these damages from now on. But you have to understand that the government's going to try to protect itself. So what was supposed to be compensation system for people who are injured has become, you have to prove that happened. You have to prove it if you get considered. So,
which I can say,
it's a total mess.
Like, when you are a person in that situation, you don't have the time or the energy to do that. You're in survival mode.
Yeah.
Like, so they, it's just.
Plus the cost of, you have to, the costs are up front for you. Then maybe you'll be brought. I think the maximum amount that you can claim is $250,000. So if your child dies, that's what it's worth to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up, and I really appreciate all that you've shared today. We've gone everywhere from the evolution of sort of the healthcare system, the public healthcare policies. We've talked about, just the changes in the vaccine schedules for the kids. We've talked about what changes are happening, what people can do, why we're seeing differences in the doctor's office. We've talked about how vaccines work in the body. We've talked about the difference between injection and natural immunization. So I feel like we've given the listeners a lot of information to educate them in a lot of different ways. And you have spent so much of your time in your life in this area. And I want to share with the listeners, I just want to ask you, why are you passionate about this?
Well, a couple of reasons. I think that once I realized that, well, first of all, in the beginning, I had a lot of pediatric patients. And so there were a lot of children who were having similar problems and things like that. And it was kind of an evolutionary thing on my part as well, as you're thinking these things through. And I have found that when I put the vaccine glasses on and say, I need to look at this from the standpoint that I know that person got vaccines. They just got them a week ago, or they got them 3 years ago, it doesn't matter. But so you have to ask yourself, well, what role does that playing a role here? Because everything is relevant, as you know.
Right.
And so that's relevant too. So you have to understand, well, is there any part of this that might be a result of this evolvement process after the allergic reaction from the vaccine, blah, blah, blah. And what I was finding was that yes, and yes. Okay. But I think that, in that whole time period, it's not easy work to do this. And like you said, nobody's paying me to do it. And that's okay, because it's a social, it's a whatever you do. But anyway, but I think it was my own, like you said, you had your own personal experience. I had my own personal experience too. My son almost died from his first vaccine. And I have to be honest, I didn't get it. It was within 10 hours. I did not make the connection. Even though I asked the pediatrician that morning, I said, well, what are the risks? Oh, no, it's only 2%. Oh, I won't be in that 2%. My son won't be in that 2%. Then he almost dies. I still didn't make that connection because the doctor assured me that he was not going to have a reaction from his shot. So at any rate, it wasn't until 5 years later that he came up with a health problem that I said to myself, how could this have happened? and you put the pieces of the puzzles together, and all of a sudden it leads you right back to the event of his near death 10 hours after getting a vaccine. So that was obviously, it was motivation enough for me to say, wow, this isn't right. And then you start seeing lots of bad things happen. I mean, autism is skyrocketing. Almost everybody knows somebody who has an autistic child
Multiple
now.
people.
But if you've seen what happens with these families and these children, and you see that that's just autism, there's all other kinds of things that happen too. And you see these people suffering, and I go, okay, you know what, we survived. I think we're still dealing with some of the health consequences of that, but we are not dealing with autism. We are not dealing with a child that died 6 hours after his 13 vaccines. So I'm blessed, and it's the least I can do is to, live in gratitude that I'm okay. We're okay. Yeah. Other people aren't. And I think that now, 20 years later, when you see what's happening from a legislative standpoint and the implementation of this draconian federal health policy that happens to be exactly the same goals that globally are being pushed by the European Union and the World Health Organization and all this and that. It's like pretty soon there's going to be nowhere to escape. This is why we have to stop this now. We have to make sure that our legislators understand that their first and foremost job is to protect our rights, not take them away. This is about medical freedom, religious freedom, and parental rights. I mean, this is our system should not be going this way. It should be going this way. This is the moral and the proper way. And so I sure as heck hope that that bill does not pass.
Yeah.
So
I really appreciate you.
I hope I answered all your questions.
You were wonderful. And I feel like we could have like a series on this, and that there are so many questions I feel that come up.
Well, I mean, I would love to share some of the, the actual clinical stuff. I mean, I've got plenty of examples of that going on, Miley being one of them.
Yeah.
And, I mean, if your audience is really tuned in to the whole energetics thing, I mean, you could talk about it.
Yeah.
If they're clueless, it's kind of hard to talk about it.
Yeah.
So, if they want to talk about it, let's talk about it.
Yeah, we'll see the response we get. We'll see the questions we get, and we'll leave it open that maybe there'll be a part 2.
Yeah. Right.
Well, thank you so much for being with me today. Where can people find you? Do you have a website? Do you have, I know you have a practice.
I used to have a website, but I decided to kind of
so that was the KNOW Vaccine Organization.
Well, that was the affiliate organization for the MVIC. I'm still the director, but there's so many sites, and there's the MVIC site, and it was like, well, do I really need to reinvent the wheel here? Because it requires maintenance, it requires updating and things like that. I just said, you know what? People out there are doing a great job.
So if we want to give the people resources, I'm going to put them in the show notes. And if you don't get all of them now, that's okay. We can do it later.
Well, I would say that it's pretty hard to get, because of data scrubbing and censorship and things like that. It's pretty hard. It's getting harder to just go online and find out information. But there are groups all over the place, that they're not hard to find, but at a minimum, you can just go to nvic.org.
Okay.
And they can give you all the state, who the people are in your state. You just press the button. I'm in Florida, or I'm in Ohio, or I'm wherever, and you'll get the state leaders and different groups in that state. So it's really a wealth of information there, resource-wise. And so that would be the first place I go.
Okay.
And then
we'll just leave them with that. I don't want to overwhelm them, and then that'll be
ndic.org.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Well,
I appreciate you coming on here.
So much. Okay, and
Such an
we'll
honor.
talk to you again soon.
All right, thank you.
Great.
And thank you for the listeners for tuning in.